Welcome to Financial Planning Explained. I'm your host, Mike Menninger, certified financial planner, owner and founder of Menninger and Associates Financial Planning. I'm pleased to have as a co-host today Kyle Ryan, also one of the CFPs on my staff, but more importantly, I'm really delighted to have Dr. Maggie Baker as our host today, or as our guest today, not our host. I'm the host. I'll figure out. We'll figure
it out as we go.
That's right. There you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
I got the opportunity to be introduced to Dr. Maggie about a month or so ago, and she is a PhD psychologist.
Correct.
And also really touches upon the topic of behavioral finance, which is something that I can't get enough of the topic. Any opportunity that we get to see or listen to someone on the subject, and when we've got the blessing of having a PhD psychologist here, what more can you ask for? So we're going to be peppering you with questions and everything that we possibly can, because I'd love to hear your insight on these subjects.
Okay.
So where we had the opportunity to view her, she has a website with 1 million videos on it, but we also watched, it was the Financial Resilience Institute?
Yes, in Vancouver, Canada.
Right. So you had, is it Eloise?
Eloise Duncan.
Eloise
is the
Duncan.
CEO.
Right. You had a 1-hour interview with her a couple weeks ago. We got the opportunity to see it. It was terrific. And, I'm going to give a plug to the Financial Resilience Institute. They really do a good job. And I would also encourage to check out your website as well. What's your website name?
MaggieBakerPhD.com.
There you go, MaggieBakerPhD.com. That's not hard because your name is showing up on the screen here. So you make things easy, you know that? So you also are an author. You wrote a book, Crazy About Money. Is that your only book that you've written?
Yes.
Not
I've written some academic papers, but, they sit on the shelf and maybe 10 people read them. And I got so sick of that, I decided I'm going lay audience all the way.
All right. There you go. Excellent. Well, so share with your viewers your story. You were a PhD psychologist for many years, and you had a situation occur to you that inspired you to shift to becoming a financial therapist, which, by the way, when I heard that the first time, I'm like, financial therapist? I said, now I'm really intrigued.
Yeah.
So tell us your story, Dr. Maggie.
Okay, well, it really started out, there were seeds of it. So I'll tell you one seed and then we'll go on to the big one. And that was when my husband, my late husband, who was a psychiatrist, very bright guy, my white knight, I thought he knew everything about money. I walk into his office one day and he's kind of curled up like this, and I thought, uh-oh. I walk over, put my hand on his shoulder, and look over, and I see a tax bill for $25,000, and I see our joint credit card right next to it. And I said, what's going on here? And he said, well, the taxes are due next day. And I thought, this is not a very efficient way to handle money. And I had kind of just given it all over to him since he was the man. And I realized from that point on, that was going to have to change. Well, long story short, I get involved in the finances of the family and work with a broker who happened to be very, very aggressive and did not have a sense of fiduciary limitations at all. And come March of 2000, when we had overinvested in technology stocks considerably, and that's a very conservative way of saying it.
Yeah, right.
I lost over the next year about several $100,000, and that sent me into a depression. And you know what it's like for a psychologist to get depressed?
Yeah, I don't know what it's.
That's not part of your job.
Right, exactly.
But it was pretty horrendous, and I remember the peak moment when I was taking a shower and I looked up at the water, and all this water was just coming down so naturally, and then all of a sudden I just burst into tears and sobbed, because that was the first time I really had emoted about all the money that was lost. And from behavioral finance that losses hit you 2.5 times harder than gains.
I heard 5 times, but how do you measure it?
Well,
Anyway,
as
it
time
doesn't
goes
matter.
on, we get, more and
Numb?
more exaggerated.
Sensitive.
But, no. So that really spun me out, but it also clicked me into action, because I had felt so responsible, so ashamed, all those negative feelings that particularly women want to hide from, so they hide by blaming themselves and kind of keeping it all inside. And
I thought men did that.
well, you have a lot of company doing it.
All right.
Yeah. And so at that point, I fired all those people and I said, I've got to learn something about finance. And the truth be told, most psychologists are money avoidant. They'll talk about their fees maybe, but they're very uncomfortable with that whole subject of money, partly because of our training, that in our training, money was never mentioned. We were going to save the world, and that was the mission and the principle that we were working on. But having been so personally hit, I could no longer subscribe to that. So I dug in, I joined an investment club, I got a very, very good conservative broker who didn't know what fiduciary meant, and I decided I was going to have the most diverse portfolio that you could possibly imagine. And that's essentially what I did. And at the same time, I found it very hard to find anybody in the psychological world who knew about money. But there were a few pioneers nationally, so I did a search and found them, and I became kind of like the second generation of the pioneers of financial therapy. And in 2009, the Financial Therapy Institute was founded.
Oh, really?
And,
Never knew there was one.
It's a good time for
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Financial
Second time
Therapy
around.
Association.
What's it called? The Financial
FTA,
Therapy?
Financial Therapy Association.
Really?
Yeah, it was out of Georgia, University of Georgia. And so I got involved with them. I got on the board for a couple of years, rode that out. And then as I was going along, I developed this as a specialty because at that time, there were probably, I don't know, maybe 20 financial therapists nationally. Now it's grown. I mean, I would say just before COVID, I got a lot of journalists who were very, very interested in this topic. And now
For themselves or just interested in a topic to write about?
Interested in the topic to write about, yeah, because I think they thought their readership should know. And it was, it was a hot, sexy topic.
Well, especially in 2009, no kidding, because 2008 was probably worse
Yeah.
than what you experienced, except that 2008 took out everybody.
Yeah.
Whereas 2000 had a heavy emphasis on the tech.
Yep.
So when you hit that point where you sobbed in the shower, let's talk about March of 2000 was really the peak. And then it started going down. At
Right.
what point in time did you finally come to the recognition, Houston, we have a problem? How deep into was it? In 2002, 2001, 2003?
It took about a year because people that were advising me were saying, well, just wait.
Write it out.
Just wait, just write it out. And I had this is really interesting in retrospect. I thought I had a foolproof system because I had I had 2 advisors. One that was kind of a friend, but she had a terrific, she went to Harvard Business School, so she was very, very savvy. And then this broker. And what I said to myself was, I won't move unless they both agree. And they couldn't agree. Mike the broker kept saying, sell, 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 these are priced to perfection. And, the other one would say, no, you just wait this out, this will turn around.
I'm surprised the one from Harvard Business School was the one who would say, wait it out. I would have figured that the aggressive guy would have said, go.
Yeah.
Or stick with it.
Yeah.
I'm surprised. That's backwards.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, it got really tangled because they kept disagreeing. And then I got tied in a knot because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know which one to believe. And that prolonged it. But it was then this is really interesting, one of my friends who had been waiting and waiting and waiting, said, I can't, screw it. They're getting too low.
Right.
I'm just going to sell and try to preserve, as much cash as I can. And when knowing him, I thought, this isn't working. And then that's when I sold.
So when did you get off the boat? As far as, because 2002 was worse than 2001.
Yeah. Oh, it kept getting worse. I mean, I probably sold just before the bottom.
Just before the bottom, which isn't good either.
No, it's terrible.
Right.
It's
and that's
terrible.
actual behavioral finance. We talk about it all the time during COVID was one, 2008 was another, and 2000 was another. And it's remarkable how the retail investor, which is referred to in our world, the regular average person investor, has a propensity to not buy until it reaches near its peak, and then they sell right before the bottom. In fact, there's contrarian things that you look at.
Yeah, they track the consumer confidence index, and
Right.
that's, as soon as it peaks, you can know to sell. And
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. It's remarkable, the contrarian opinion to it, because it falls under the behavioral finance again. But you experienced it firsthand.
Oh, I certainly did. And, that it was interesting because when the market went down in 2008, I had lost so much already. And I watched it lose, watch my portfolio lose again. But by that time, I had enough patience and I had enough trust in this advisor. He said, just ride it out. And that's what I did. And then a couple years later,
it's back to where it was again.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you first really started focusing and learning about this in the heat of it, when you noticed that the market was already coming down. How do you think that introduction to this world, the financial world, how do you think that shaped the next few years as you learned about finance, as you learned about investing? And then even beyond that, how do you think it impacted your reaction in 2008 and 2009?
Well, I think it really underscored how important money was. Now, that sounds stupid to say, because everybody knows it's important. But what I mean is managing it is important, because it's so fragmented. You can ride along and think you're doing fine, but if you put all the pieces together and you see the amount of debt that you have, you see how you're spending, and get a holistic picture, it might look very, very, very different.
Yeah.
And it was extremely sobering, and it also had a lot to do with the background that I grew up with, because my parents came from very, very wealthy people, but they weren't. And I would hear stories about, oh yeah, we would have parties on our yacht, and we'd do this and that. My mother was a debutante, and they lived the life of Riley when they were coming up. But then my father, who had started off in Annapolis, ended up not liking it. It was a football player, so he liked the football, but he didn't like the math. And he left after 2 years and became kind of a bon vivant, and never really, very, very smart guy, but never really developed much. So I was living in this world where I heard about this fabulous wealth, but I didn't see it. We kind of lived in a ghetto, in a white suburban ghetto, but still it felt like a ghetto to me. So that connection with that kind of background, and now we're talking generational issues flowing down.
You're bringing up all kinds of things that I want to talk about. The generational, the parents, grandparents, and the depression. These are great topics. We need to take a break, and we'll pick this up right when we come back.
Okay.
So we'll be back with you in just a few moments.
Do you keep up regularly with your investments? Where exactly are your hard-earned dollars going? Are you financially prepared for an emergency?
I'm Mike Meninger, founder of Meninger & Associates Financial Planning. We believe that education and knowledge are powerful, and we want our clients to understand why we are making the recommendations that we make. It's your money, and you deserve to know where it's going, because it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. So call us today to discuss your financial concerns. Welcome back to Financial Planning Explained, and delighted to have Dr. Maggie Baker here. And we left off, you were talking about your parents. There were two topics that came up: generational wealth. You were talking about how your husband was managing things, and it raised a handful of questions. But let's start with the first one,
Okay.
that your parents lived through the Depression,
Yes.
which I've learned through managing clients, that I've found that people who are really conservative, their parents lived through the Depression. And what ended up happening, and now I'm looking at it from a psychological perspective, is that their attitude towards money was how they were raised. And so therefore, I'm going to ask you this question of, are people's attitudes towards money learned as a child from their parents, or do they learn it on their own? What's your assessment of that?
Well, let me give you an example of, and I think you may have remembered the question that I asked the audience in our...
Oh, I remember it.
Yeah. What's your first memory of
I
money?
got my first memory of I remembered that.
Go for it.
I'll tell you in a minute.
Go
You got to
for
answer
it.
my question first.
No. I am answering your question.
I remember my first memory of money was, and this must say a little bit about my personality as an entrepreneur. It was in 1972 and 1973. I'm 8 years old. And I remember going to the bank with $50, getting a bag of pennies, 100 rolls, going home, sitting at the ping pong table, unrolling them, sorting them by date, and going back to the bank, and then re-rolling the ones I didn't want, and going back to the bank with like $43 of rolled pennies and $7 and say, give me another bag. And I would just do this and do this and do this. And that was my first experience with money. Now, my father was a coin collector and a dealer, hobby dealer. And next thing you know, I'm doing the same thing. So that was like my first business approach.
I'd say that's unique.
Yeah, so then he said to me, he said, well, why are you getting rid of all these brand new ones? You'll never see these brand new pennies like this again. Next thing you know, I got all kinds of, that's how I remember, rolls of 72s and 73s. That's where I saved all the Wheaties and had them rolled by date and everything else like that.
So what as an adult, what is your predominant style in relation to money? Spender, saver, avoider?
I'm definitely not an avoider. I am definitely a saver. I am one who is really cheap when it comes to spending on myself. But when I spend, I have a propensity to spend big.
Yeah.
You know, go big or go home, they say, right? But you know, I mean, I'll do a trip,
Yeah.
but I'll go to Walmart and get the thing on sale.
Yes.
But I'm a saver.
You're a saver.
I'm a saver.
You're a saver, but you're living your values also. I mean,
Yeah.
because the values that you have are embedded in how you spend money. But you're definitely, you stay within your means and you enjoy your money. And the downside of being a saver is that you might like saving so much that if you get a windfall and your family wants to go out and blow it, you'll say, no, I want to see that grow in my
Right.
portfolio at
Or
the end of the
guilty
month.
spending. I will tell you, sometimes I feel guilt in spending,
Yeah.
but I'm getting better at it.
Push through.
I'm working my way through it.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
But you see my point, that the fuel of childhood really determines how you relate to money. And some people outgrow it, what they learn, and some people don't. And most people, as children, learn half-truths because a brain of a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old is not mature.
Right.
And so they learn, you know, maybe there's an issue with money. They see their parents fight about it or don't talk about it at all. And so they'll think, oh, I did something wrong, that they never talk about it, but I can see they're upset. or they yell and scream at each other, there must be something that I did that caused that. So they take it in as, part of their problem. And what they generate from that is very idiosyncratic, meaning that different kids will do different things with those beliefs. But for instance, if you take an example of a child whose mother gets upset at the end of the month when she sees the credit card bill and starts to cry, and they are poor, or he gets the feeling that they're poor. They may be fine, but on a feeling level,
Right.
it's communicated, there's a real problem.
Not directly communicated, but
unconsciously.
obscure. Right. Correct. Okay, I can see that.
Unconsciously. So he'll say, and if 5-year-old is capable of doing this, when I grow up, I'm going to be rich. And so that's what he believes. So he grows up and he starts a business. He's an entrepreneur. He starts a business, starts to do well, and as it does better and better, he gets bored with it, tries to start a second business. He gets all involved in the second business, and now both of them start to falter because he can't spend, he doesn't have enough time to spend to both of them.
Is this Elon Musk you're talking about? I'm sorry.
Oh, I wish I would have upped my fee for him. But anyway, that brought him to therapy. And long story short, what he uncovered was he had a strong unconscious belief or unaware belief that once poor, always poor. So the minute he could really see that he was going to be successful, he started to back off because it was contrary to that view that he had that once poor, always poor. But becoming aware of that, which he got through financial therapy, he was able to get rid of the second business and really engage in the first business and scaled up.
Neat.
In a situation like that, how can you teach or work with someone to help them enjoy the progress? Because the old cliche, life's all about the destination, not the journey, right? We hear it all the time. When I get this second, house or the shore house, I'll be happy. When I do X, Y, and Z, wealth or rich, I'll be happy. How do you get them to enjoy the journey as opposed to waiting until that destination? Because all of a sudden you reach it, goalpost moves.
Yeah, that's a really, and it
does
always
go.
will move.
It always moves. I was going to say that.
Will
Because the
move.
world around you always moves.
Well, your goals change because, if you say, whatever, I want to get that, once you get it, now you want more.
Yeah, or you're in a crowd of people who already have that, and maybe the reason
Keeping
you
up
wanted to
with
get
the
there is
Joneses, right.
yeah, exactly.
But it's the whole concept of habituation. If you buy a mountain house and you have this fabulous view and you see it for the first time, you're knocked over. If you buy the house and you go there by the third month or the first month, it's like wallpaper.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, and once you habituate, then the boredom starts, and then you have to seek more stimulation in order to keep the dopamine flowing. Mm-hmm. And the dopamine is the neurotransmitter that gives you a sense of pleasure. It's hooked into your, pleasure circuitry. So you want to seek it, and the dopamine gets. You experience the dopamine as you seek it. Once you get it, the rush is over.
It almost sounds a little bit like that example that you used where you had the business owner built a successful business but got bored with it. It sounds like the same phenomenon.
Well, it may have been, but once uncovered, what was uncovered was this belief that once poor, always poor. That's why, it's all on an individual basis because people absorb information and catalog it in their minds in completely different ways, particularly children, and particularly children whose parents are not very empathic because they feel alone with it, and then they can develop all kinds of fantasies that are, maybe half true, but not all true.
Yeah. That's why I think it's also really important is for you as a financial therapist, for us as financial advisors, we're asking someone their goals. It could be using the shore house an example again. We try not to take I want a shore house at face value.
Right.
What is it about a shore house that is so special to you? Is it spending time with your children? Is it the beach environment? What is it so that because if they haven't thought about it already, they're going to be forced with that reality, like you mentioned, 1 to 3 months in.
Right.
So having uncovered that early on before making the final decision to do something like that, it's really important to ask why.
Yeah, one of the things that I do, well, I'll give you an example of another, well, this is what I want to say. First of all, financial therapy is not a year after year after year long therapy, because, there's something very concrete about money. And most people don't want to talk about it, so they're very shy to come in unless there's a crisis.
Right.
Then the crisis brings them in, and typically it's a crisis in couples, because that's where you get disagreement about money styles.
It's usually number one.
Types. Yeah. And so they'll come in, and the first thing I do is ask them to state their values. What are their main 4 top values? Education, entertainment, travel, philanthropy, whatever it is. And then I'll ask them to bring in all of their financial information so we can see where the money is going. And as an example, this one couple in their 30s, both good salaries, but they couldn't figure out why they didn't have much money at the end of the month. So they came in, I put that formula on them where I asked them what their values were and to bring their bills in. So we went through the bill, line item by line item. Long story short, they were spending 25 to 30% of their disposable income eating out 5 and 6 times a week. And they were shocked. They had no idea, number one, that they were eating out that much, and number two, how expensive it was.
Oh,
and
yeah.
this was before COVID and before the inflation
Right.
issue. And they looked at it, saw the data, and they were free enough internally. So they said, well, they both agreed they were only going out once or twice. And that was the end of the
You
problem.
raise another good point that there's no way in the world we're going to get even close. We're actually wrapped up on our first episode. And because of that, we're going to do more. How's that sound?
That sounds good.
I'd like you to take a minute and just briefly talk about your book. I want you to promote your book, then we'll wrap up, and then we'll do a second part to this.
Okay, great. Well, my book got generated by that nice conservative broker that I found, and he was very familiar with my pain and my sob story. And at one point, this was after the shower, he said, Maggie, you're not the only one that got hurt here. And I think you ought to write a book because other people could profit from the stories that you know about from your clients.
Wow.
So I thought, oh, okay, I've never written a book. But I took the challenge and I went away on a retreat for a weekend. I locked myself in my room for 2 days and said, I don't care what comes out of me. I'm just going to sit here and write. And that's how I got started. And long story short, this book came out, and it's really it's on a developmental lifespan. So I start with childhood, and I go all the way through making a legacy and becoming what I call a money master. And what I do is simply tell stories that my patients have told me, and I got permission from them. I disguise them and everything. But they're all real stories because it's an awareness book. I'm not going to tell anybody how to budget. I'm not going to tell anybody what stocks to buy. But I am going to tell them to listen to their heart and listen to their feelings and figure out what their mindset is about money or what their relationship is to money. And if you get that down and you get the idea that you don't have to self-sabotage by either avoidance or overspending or hoarding, then you'll be in really good shape. So that's the message of the book. And then given COVID and given everybody's time crunch, I decided to make an Audible edition. And in order to develop trust and hopefully authenticity in my voice and what I've learned over the years, that I narrated it myself.
Oh, neat.
In a
Excellent.
studio very
no
much
small
like
effort.
this.
Oh, good.
Oh, it's a huge effort.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Maggie, thank you very much. This was so fascinating. We're going to do another episode because there's so much more we want to talk to you about.
Great. I'm
All right.
here.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you as the viewer had a good time enjoying, learned something, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thanks for joining. We're going to have another episode with Dr. Maggie. Thank you for joining us.